Hi, welcome. My name is Steve Worcester, and this is part one in a two-part series on casting a resin egg. What I do is take the shavings from a previous resin turning, mix those with resin, put them into a mold, and then cast a block. Then we'll take and we'll trim that up on the bandsaw, and we'll put it between centers, and we'll turn the basics of an egg and put it in a chuck. Hope you enjoy it. Any questions, comments? Leave them down in the bottom and let's talk about it. Thanks. All right, now that I have all my shavings, these are cutoffs from making pizza cutters. And basically it's just a mix of colored resin and PETG plastics, which is what the pizza cutters handles are made of. And you can recycle this to some extent, but each generation gets a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter because you've got more resin, clear resin mixed in with it. Anyway, so I have about, this is, I figure, 15 grams of this fine mix here. And I have my mold here. I'm gonna do one side. And I've written on there 219 grams of resin. Essentially, the mold is 2 inches by 2 inches, which is 4 inches, times 3 inches, which is 12 cubic inches, and about 18 grams per cubic inch. You come out with somewhere around 220-ish, 230-ish. So we're gonna go 220 grams. I want 110 grams each of part A and B. Since this is Alumilite Slow, it is mixed by weight, equal parts A and B. And you want to sneak up on the 110. You don't want to go over, because then we would have to add more of the next one. And 110 on the nose. Pretty happy with that. Get that out of the way, we don't need any more. And then zero it out, go 110 again. And what we're going to do is, I have figured out through trial and error, we want to mix the resin in with the plastic before putting it through the mold, or into the mold, because we want to saturate the resin scraps with resin to eliminate as much bubbles as we can. 111. Fall the horror. And with Alumilite, essentially, once you mix it, it is clear once you have it well mixed, but at the same time, you don't want to just assume that it's done, because you want to scrape off the sides, you want to scrape the bottom, you want to make sure that you get it really well mixed. And the biggest reason for that is, if you need to go back and you need to scrape the sides to fill the mold, you want to make sure that the stuff you're putting in there is well mixed. So this has about an 8-minute pot life, set time, however you want to look at it. So what I'll do is take the majority of this and put it in there, and then mix this up, tromps it around. That's a technical term, right? Tromps. You want to saturate everything you can. You can see at the bottom it's not wet yet, so you want to get that mixed in. Theoretically, there's more than enough resin because we're adding volume with the shavings, but it's pretty odd that it doesn't seem to make that much of a difference in how much we have left. Because this comes out of the mold, we'll take that and confine all the mess to this. Oh yeah, oh yeah, that looks great. Want to just pound that down a little bit. This mold is a little bit taller to allow for runoff. It's about 1/8 of an inch tall. And hopefully we have enough resin now that it'll peak here. You can see we have a little bit of bubbles coming up. That's good. We want to see that. Try and get out as many of the bubbles as possible by trouncing it down again. And if you're worried about it being deformed on the left side, you can put a blank in there. I have one over here. Just happen to have one. And that way it's not going to be too far off as far as being deformed into an oblong. Now, if this was really full and completely liquid, then this probably might not be a good idea to do that this way in taking it out and putting it back in, because then there's a potential that I would overflow the mold and make a bigger mess than I already have. And mind you, I always make a mess, but put it into our tray here. Gonna put the lid on. The air pressure is set at the wall at about 90. I have a regulator on this, and that regulator is set somewhere in the 60s, which is more than enough. You want to get these as evenly clamped as possible so you don't get a leak. But even when I got a leak, it was still in the well in the 50s, so that isn't a problem. Now, what we don't want to do is let air in too fast, because if there's a lot of liquid there, the air rushing down in there causes turbulence and gets the resin to splash around. All right, we're at about 68, and it'll settle down to about 60-ish, and we'll come back and look at it in a couple hours. Hope for the best. Okay, now that we have demolded, what I did was I took some side cutters and cut the edge off here, and then I'm gonna just hit it with this fabulous sanding block that we sell and some 120 Abralon, so that it's smooth and I can run it through the bandsaw and see what we have inside. Got the bandsaw set up where we want to cut. It's flat, surface is clean. Start up the vacuum. Beautiful. Got good penetration all the way around. Doesn't look like there's a whole lot of air bubbles, which is gonna make it really nice. 2 thumbs. Now that we've cleaned up the blank on the bandsaw and determined that it's clean, it's gonna be great for this application. I have taken and used a center finder, put an X on here, and put a divot in there so that I can put the pointy body things between centers. I have a step center on the front here, and I have a really fine live center in the tailstock, and those are the pointy body things I'm going to use. Found that lining it up to the headstock's body center first and then bringing this in saves a lot of time. We're going to use this Matte Monaco designed skew from Robust. It's M42. It's great steel. It's got a rounded edge and then flat on the heel part. Let's put on some safety gear and get at it. And just like that, presto changeo, I am suited up. The official smock of champions, headgear. So I'm going to take a skew, just round this down, make sure there's no big bubbles or anything in it, and then get it so I can put a tenon on this. Let's rip. Tater chip. I've said it before and it bears repeating, is that you don't want to attack this too aggressive. You want to make sure that you're not forcing the cut, because you don't want it to shatter. I mean, while it is a fairly durable plastic, this is a Lumelite clear slow. And it works great for this application, but any plastics, if you push them too hard, they're going to shatter. And when they shatter, it goes deep, it creates like fissures. Now, one of the things about turning resin is the constant shavings that are coming off of it. And while, you know, I do reuse them as much as possible where applicable, what I'm more concerned with is getting them wrapped around the axle, so to speak. Is it isn't really that strong, but what you don't want to do is take and try and remove them by hand while the lathe is spinning, because you don't want to get into any situation, even if it's rare, where you're going to endanger your phalanges. They are expensive to even cut off. Don't ask me how I know. So if you're going to turn acrylics, what I suggest is get one of these fingernail brushes, and that way when it's you get a lot of shavings caught up in it, because they're just going to wind around, then just kind of brush them from side to side and they break up and fall off. All right, let's get a tenon going. Like this. Okay, I got some purchased there, so I can proceed to the next step, which is putting this on a chuck. So we're using a Vic Mark 120, which is a beast of a chuck, with what are known as Batty Jaws. These were designed by Stuart Batty. I don't think they're still available, so if you find a pair, there's two different sizes that I know of, well worth the money. My wipe center engaged in the tailstock. So now we'll take some cuts with some detail gouges and try and make some sense of this. See if it makes eggy sense. Let's go back to the skew for a minute here. The skew is one of those things where if you're not real proficient at it, it can be kind of intimidating. I'm not super proficient at the skew. I will be the first to admit. It's, I'm sure I won't be the last to admit either. You really could do this with almost any tools. I mean, certainly with, to some extent, a spindle rough and gouge to rough it out, but you've got to be gentle. And probably even a bowl gouge, without a doubt. A little practice. Let's take a moment to sharpen some tools. Whew, that's hot. So one of the things you want to make sure is that you keep this all convex curves. You don't want a concave on it because it is an egg and there's no concaves on an egg. Oopsie. Let's drop this little. Oh, by the way, I did change to a shorter tool rest so it would fit in here and I wouldn't be in danger of having a canted angle that would make it difficult to get in there. The thing about resin, though, is that if you do it properly, you can use a shear scraper on here without any problems, because you don't have an issue with uphill, downhill, grain direction, etc. You just need to make sure that you respect the fact it is resin. Flatten this out a little. And we want to make sure that we have the point of the live center, or the indentation from the live center, out of the way, or doesn't make it into the final product, let's say. So we want to back that off a little. But it's kind of, once it's done, you can't put it back in. So I want to leave it there, because that way when I go at this, because I can shape this now with a monster shear scraper. Now when you're using a shear scraper here, you need to make sure that you're sweeping it back and forth. You don't want to sit in one place. And remember that your little tiny burr on the top here is not going to last very long. It is a pretty abrasive product, and we don't want to get any chatter like that. That's why I leave the live center in place. And actually, I'll give credit where credit is due, because I didn't know about the trick to use the brush until one of our sessions, probably this time last year, which would be Easter time frame, where somebody suggested it in the chat. It's rather brilliant. Thanks to them. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And hope we're going to get all the... Let's fix the nose again. Pull the tailstock away. That looks pretty good. It's a little pointy, but that's easy to fix. I'd rather do it now than think about doing it with abrasives. What we'll be able to do is sand it back to about here. Maybe take a, because once again, since we don't have any grain patterns, you really would have a hard time over sanding this, because there's basically the entire thing is very similar densities. It's not like with a plastic piece like this where you're going to have varying densities of material because of the plastic and then the resin, or wood where you have early wood and late wood. Let's get some abrasive. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our Galaxy. This is a hybrid aluminum oxide ceramic product from Mirka, and it comes in 80 to 2000. My lovely wife stamps the grit number on the back. It's available in 2-inch and 3-inch, and in this case I'm going to wet sand. I'm going to start with 240 because I don't want to go down too far and then have to remove those scratches, because essentially when you're sanding, you're trying to eliminate the marks on here by making scratches over it and abrading it and removing material. So if I can get away with not going too far back, then I don't have to make scratches to get over the scratches. So I am putting a cloth down to make it a little bit less of a mess. Spray bottles, can't have enough of them. Well, yeah, you probably could, but. Taking a bath. When you're wet sanding, you don't have as much of an issue with buildup or pilling, and pilling is when you get material building up on the surface and it starts to kind of melt into the surface, and then you're creating scratches with that material that's embedded in the surface. Well, you're creating a mess is what you're doing, but all right, that looks pretty good. Let's do this a little bit more. Okay, let's get something, wipe it down to give it a look. One of the things about wet sanding is once you let it dry off a little bit, you get to start to see any aberrations in it. There is some holes in it. You can see that, for instance, this mark, if we zoom in super close, how far can we zoom in? This mark right here, see how it's round? And that one right there is round. So what's going to happen is then those areas are going to require either filling in or just accepting the fact that there's bubbles in it. And of course, I think a little bit more of the saturating the resin and putting it in there with more liquid, I think will help eliminate more of the bubbles. So we can see here that we have some little pinholes, and what I'm going to attempt to do is I left the dust in there from the sanding, and we can use that as a little surface to to give it something to glue onto. A little heptane. And we just kind of keep going. There's, you know, there is certainly a point of diminishing return, right? And this is Mercury Flex Thin, which I really like the product. I don't sell it, but then again, there's a lot of things I like and don't sell, I suppose. Available at a dealer near you. Now, when you start talking accelerator, there's basically two kinds of accelerators, and it varies by manufacturer. There's acetone based and heptane based. And heptane certainly is, well, I guess either of them aerosolized is not really good for you, but heptane is probably the best in that it doesn't bloom a lot, but it's also going to vary based on the manufacturer as to what kind of accelerator they recommend. All right, that is the end of the first part. Move on to the second part, and you can see how we turn it around, cut the tenon off, and do sanding and polishing, and finish it up and see how she looks. Thanks for watching.